Hi, I'm just going to give you a little bit of history to IS 440 and where we are with the current revision. And then I'll go on with a few other issues that I've shown some of the difficulties with revising IS 440, and then just talk about a few other little things. First of all, I'll talk about Technology Ireland. So it was set up to provide technical information to the timber industry and anybody who's really using timber. So we've advised a number of companies, home bond, government departments, and so on. Technology Ireland is supported by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. We're represented on a number of Irish and European committees. So I'm the convener of TC 08, which is the main timber standards body advising NSAI. I'm also, we also use a number of our timber experts, including Gordon Iggs. Bob, myself and Gordon were in the Institute for Industrial Research and Standards, and then it eventually evolved into Enterprise Ireland. And then we all left to set up our own consultancy. We also have used CREST and NUIG. We've used CREST, for example, to test plywood and to try and set up a scheme for the testing of wood preservatives in timber, okay? And there are two aspects of wood preservative in timber. One is present, and the other one then is it present in the correct quantities. So this is just very briefly some of the advice we've given, okay, relation to the standards, the building regulations, the technical guidance documents to the building regulations, the CPR, CE marking, and DOPs, which is a bit of a problematic area. Some science certifiers collect DOPs, but they actually need to read them because what the declared values in a DOP need to be checked to ensure that they're adequate for the envisaged end use. So a product might have a DOP, but it mightn't be suitable where somebody's intending to use it. Materials testing, including sampling. Sampling is actually quite a bit of a problem. I looked a lot at sampling in terms of plywood, and it's a nightmare. Sampling in terms of testing, it depends on what you're testing for. Are you going to test it for compliance with the harmonized specification, or are you testing it for the material that's arriving on site? So it's a limited population. Factory brushing control and quality system documentation is also something we've advised on. It'd be a mistake to think that factory brushing control will guarantee a product. It reduces the risk of that product not complying. Factory and site inspections, reviewing the second generation Eurocodes. Well, this is the normal temperature, this is fire design. This is a new thing, all the Eurocodes, concrete, steel, and so on, will have this, which is to do with execution, which I'll talk about shortly. But here are the contact details. And just bear in mind, we can talk to anybody about anything to do with timber, really, okay? So a brief history. Around about 2000 or so, a timber frame study was undertaken by the Timber Frame Housing 2002 Consortium. I think that's the date when they produced the report. Tried to the main project consultants, and timber frame that's used here is the same as that was used in the UK. So they just confirmed what good practices as was being used in the UK. The Department of Environment at the time and the timber frame industry, mainly the ITFMA, co-funded BRE to undertake preparatory work on a draft for the timber frame standard that would become IS 440. So a draft was submitted to NSAI, and the working group eventually produced IS 440. which was first published in 2007. So here are you know, the responsibilities, which is actually quite an important part, but hopefully it will be revised and improved upon in the new, when the standard is revised. Materials are important. It was one of the reasons why 440 came into being. The department were particularly concerned about site practices, which 440 covers, but obviously having a limited standard would not be good in the context. There's a lot behind timber frame because it's prefabricated. It has to be designed, has to use the right materials. Construction details here are important, and site work also is important. So manufacturers there as well. So just concentrating on site work would not guarantee a good building. Again, materials are very important. Services were introduced, mainly dealing with surface cavities in certain situations and differential movement, which is where, because timber, as it dries out, will shrink, okay? So if you have block work, you might have block work, concrete stairs sitting on block work, whatever, there's going to be differential movement. So you have to cater for that, which 440 covers. And there are ways of reducing differential movement. If you use the engineered wood joists like steel web joists or I-joists, you're going to reduce the amount of differential movement. Control the moisture content of the timber will also help to control differential movement. The title of the 2009 document is Timber Frame Dwellings, but apartments are also covered. And the committee members included the Department of Environment, the ITFMA, Home Bond, and NSAI, as well as a number of consulting engineers and 3 timber frame companies and a roof truss company. I was involved in that as well, so I would have been under the consulting engineers, presumably. Scope, this is roughly the scope, and it hasn't really changed that much, okay? It was revised in 2014, but there was only a limited revision. The new one will be, the scope will be similar actually, but it's a platform method. You put a wall up and then you put the floor on, then you put another wall on, another floor, etc., or roof. There are other methods. There was a volumetric development in Poppentry in Dublin that was tried out, which was from a company from the north. It did have a reputation for volumetric building. I don't think it worked particularly well, but I think also that they had lost their skills in that area. Volumetric looks good on paper, but you have to be, takes a lot of care. Maximum of 60 minutes fire resistance, that's fair enough. The maximum 4 stories, these are come from the technical guidance documents. But certainly the maximum height of 10 meters does. So that's 4 floors, 3 stories. The maximum 4 stories is sort of a natural limit, because once you go above that, you're into disproportional collapse, which has a lot of difficulties trying to obtain in timber. The drain ventilated cavity, which was mentioned earlier, that's if water gets into the cavity, then it can get out. Either external timber relief or timber cladding. Now, there are other external claddings. 440 will probably introduce, the revision will probably introduce cement claddings. Mechanical fixings, there were 2 ways, there's 2 ways really, at least in terms of manufacture. There was a draft EN that was proposed, and one was mechanical fixings, which is part 1, and part 2 was for glued panels, which is where the USB, for example, would be glued to the timber framing. The standard did not cover on-site fabrication. The amount of on-site, stick-built fabrication that takes place is very, very, very small, and probably unlikely to come to the attention of building control. The main standard, again, it covered these British standards, Part 6.1 there was mainly for racking design, a minor amendment in 2007, and then BS 5268 4.2. And 4.1 you could argue would be applicable as well, but that's for fire design by calculation, if you like, or part 1 would be 4.1 would probably be more for assessment. The equivalent European standards were also referenced, okay, and all national standards conflicting with European standards had to be withdrawn by 2010. However, national standards continue to be used in Ireland and the UK, and probably to some extent to further afield. The UK are still using these standards, 5268. Part 6 is for racking, but part 2 would be for normal temperature design if you were designing a beam, floor joist, column, anything like that, a purlin, anything like that there. And that's really bad because some of these standards are dated 2002. So if you look at how long it takes to produce a standard, the technical guidance given in those would now probably be 25, 30 years even in some cases. The European standards are very good, by the way. The European standards were not really used until about 2013 or so. We actually had to have a meeting with some of the system owners in terms of roof trusses. Oh, the microphone, sorry. They were continuing to use designs to the BS, and of course Britain always had this ambivalent attitude to the European Union. So we had a meeting with them and we told them that they have to design using the Eurocodes. And a couple of the system owners didn't have their software updated to the Eurocodes, but they were given a period of time and eventually they did. So this limited amendment in 2014 removed any of the conflicting standards with the European standards, leaving only valid standards. All standards are supposed to be voluntary, but in reality, of course, they're not. The withdrawal standards primarily were the BS 5268, which I mentioned, the fire testing one, BS 476, and BS 6399 loading. So all of these have European counterparts. There are also a number of Irish standards withdrawn. SR 70 roof trusses, SR 71. These sort of replaced the ones that were withdrawn, okay? The SRs, they could have come out earlier as SWIFT documents, but because they hadn't gone for public comment, the Department of Environment weren't happy with that. But these are essentially codes of practice, unlike IS 440, which is a full standard. The difference between a code of practice and the standard is the standard will say shall, a code of practice will say should, and we still use that terminology today. In fact, the Eurocodes have been revised. They have other things like may, shall, should, and they're all recommendations and they're requirements, you know. So these three standards, including 440, are non-contradictory complementary information to the Eurocodes, because you can't have something that conflicts with the Eurocodes. But during that work, leading up to the 2014 amendments, it was realized that a larger revision was needed, so that work started and is still ongoing. The CPR required compulsory CE marking and provision of DOP. This is for materials, not for the timber frame per se. So that also had to be addressed, and that sort of slowed things down. PIR installation was being used by the industry behind the plasterboard lining. So the department then requested that this construction be fire tested. It could not be designed by calculation to the Eurocode, because the Eurocode assumes that the fire lining is fixed timber. Okay, and in this particular case, it's PIR. So work on the standard was delayed while the fire tests were carried out, and those tests commenced in August 2017. With encouragement, the fire tests were extended to cover a range of timber constructions, some of which could have been designed by calculation to Eurocode. And Technical Guidance Document B, Volume 2, was published in 2017, and then that had to be looked at. And in 2020, the Supplementary Guidance Document to Volume 2 was published based on the FAR tests carried out largely by the ITFMA, the Irish Timber Frame Manufacturers Association. The 2020 Supplementary Guidance Document was based on the extensive FAR tests, as I mentioned. It collected together a number of earlier circulars and guidance documents based on FAR tests. So you had one on walls, trusses, and floors. The revision of 440 started in earnest around 2019 before COVID disrupted the committee work. NSAI tries to get consensus in its committees, in other words, trying to get agreement with everybody. If it's not possible, then the clause might not be changed in an amendment, or NSAI will have to make a decision not to do something or to do something. The issues discussed with the committee so far in terms of the current revision: a proposal that standard be amended to support the supplementary guidance document rather than Irish building regulations. So the committee cannot agree on this, partly because the FAR tests were not in the public domain. It was decided that IS 440 will only refer to the Irish building regulations. It might acknowledge the existence of the supplementary guidance document. It might not, that's in the air. The substantial FAR test undertaking could help FAR design in Europe and Ireland. It'd be interesting to compare the FAR tests calculations to the EN. There's a huge amount of information there, and second generation Eurocodes, in terms of design by calculation, they are based on a lot of FAR tests being carried out all over Europe. So, it would be good if Ireland could contribute to those FAR tests through the release of those FAR tests. The figures in the 2014 version on plasterboard linings were amended to give typical details, largely about information on plasterboard thickness and type of fixings. Originally, the standard did have information on plasterboard fixings and thicknesses and things and type and so on. But with this supplementary guidance document there, we felt that we couldn't really do that. So it just gives typical details. It doesn't tell you how, the length of the fixings, the type of plasterboard or the thickness of plasterboard. FAR design by calculation is reinforced in the current working draft, and allows FAR, which has to be demonstrated by calculation, FAR test, or a combination of the two. This is what the Eurocode says. You can design by calculation, by FAR test, or a combination of the two. Additional information will be given on FAR testing in relation to the FAR test loads. So if you have a steel web joist, they can span 5.5 meters, 6 meters in some cases. But when you go to FAR test it, normally the furnace will only have a 4 meter span. So you need to increase the FAR test load so that the stresses in those members are the same for that larger span. The committee is considering in greater detail the environmental issues like carbon dioxide and so on, okay? Production. And there's this new thing, or relatively new, environmental product declarations and panel recycling and reuse. How far we get at, I'm not actually sure. And it can't really give too much details. These are actually quite complicated. So the people on the committee tend to be, know more about materials, design, erection, fabrication, and so on, rather than the environmental details. Timber frame is good. It's good in terms of carbon in a number of ways. Not only does it use timber, which locks up carbon, but with timber frame, the actual U values, for example, are actually more accurately what you're going to get in construction. when you come to design, because the insulation is sheltered. Whereas if you have insulation in a cavity, then any gap between that insulation and the timber or the inner leaf of the wall allows air circulation, and your U value will become very, very bad. There's a bit more information going to be given on factory reduction control, but bearing in mind, while it's important, it's no guarantee that the product is meets the relevant specification. A large number of new diagrams have been drafted. Section 8 was entitled Construction Details. It's now Execution, as that's a term used in second generation Eurocode, this one I mentioned earlier. I'm hoping that this term, which I don't particularly like, will be more relevant in terms of the headings of the standard, so that you could have wall panel fabrication. That could be execution, wall panel factory assembly, or something like that there. So I'm not sure what is going to happen with this in terms of the different sections. It would make sense to me to have the current sections entitled execution, manufacture, execution, site work, and so on. But anyway, that's up to the committee. So this is what this is the definition of execution, by the way. All activities carried out for the physical completion of the work, including procurement, the inspection, and documentation thereof, covers basically everything. This term covers work on site and may also signify the fabrication components off-site and the subsequent erection on site. So it covers basically everything. That's the definition in the Eurocode. It's repeated in 440. Okay. I'm not sure how this is, what this is going to look like. It's a totally new concept. Okay, and of course it'd be there for steel masonry. Sorry, masonry, steel, concrete, and so on. Okay, the section on durability has been improved. There was a proposal that mandatory preservative treatment of timber framing be removed. That's the studs and so on, top rail, bottom rail. So-placed timber cavity barriers, ground floor joists, and external wall battens would still be required to be treated, so that it was never proposed that that would change. BS 8417, which is a code of practice, give guidance on the need for preservative treatment, and it's commonly used in Ireland and referenced in 440 and SR 70 and SR 82, which is tiling and slating. It effectively recommends treatment for timber framing. It's a code of practice, okay? It's quite an important standard to be aware of, because what it does is it's a code of practice. So it can't tell you you shall treat, okay? What it says you should treat, or it actually says you should give consideration to treatment. But what it does is it recommends a natural durability of timber related to the use, okay, of the timber, and to the desired service life. Okay, so BS 8417 has three desired service lives. I think it's 15, 30, and 60 years, okay? So what it means is then if you have a product that is only required a service life of 30 years, you could have a lower natural durability requirement or a lower treatment requirement. But while there are some cases where the risk of decay in the timber framing is low enough to permit the mandatory requirement to be removed, but these would have to be specified in detail and subject to the building designer's agreement. So are the situations where the risk for timber decay is low? Well, there probably are, but you would have to find what they are. I would say that closed cell would be one part of that. Increased factory production control, inspections, checklists, control of moisture content. Then maybe on site, again, more detailed inspections. So I mean, you can have inspections and you can have supervision. So the builder should be doing the supervision and building control should be doing the inspections. The committee failed to agree on the need for mandatory treatment, so it's not going to change. in the amendment. But to address this and to progress the standards, in other words, to stop us arguing about treatment, it was suggested that Ireland should have his own version of BS 8417, especially as we have no say in it, and it's up for revision at the moment, which we can't say anything about, contrary to that. So a separate meeting was held to discuss this, but so far nothing has been proposed. Sorry. Yeah, there's this that there should be something on cement boards. I think something on cement boards will be included in the standard. There are systems out there. Instead of having a very porous brick leaf, you can have cement boards with render on them, quite thin renders, in fact. Fixed patterns and so on. So you still have a ventilated cavity. So there'd be something on this. The only thing is that would have to address is that there is a standard for cement boards. I don't know if there's more than one, okay? But it doesn't refer to fire, okay? And what that means is that if you had a board being used a board and was within 1 meter of the relevant boundary, that would have to be thought about, because obviously you have fire exposure from the outside. Although the other thing about it is fire exposure from the outside actually has a different fire time curve to the fire exposure from the inside. It's intended that's a lower, it's not as severe. It's intended the standard will require timber frame exempting walls to be made with the fire lining fixed in the factory, which Colin mentioned earlier. So that's going to be in the standard. NSAI expect that draft will be shortly prepared for working group 23 members for a full review. And they hope that the standard will go out for public comment in the first half of 2024. I would be very surprised if it could get out in this time period. All right, that's the same one. But there are at least 3 representatives of building control on the timber committees. This is on the committee, not just TC08, but also on the working group 23, which is dealing with IS 440. Building control officers should review the draft standard when it's out for public comment. And to speed up the publication of 440, it would probably be better to submit their comments through building control rather than as individuals. And obviously discussions within building control would help this. I mean, certainly it would be good if the experiences of building control were reflected in 440. There may be diagrams missing, there may be other things missing that building control might want to see in that. And it's likely that 440 will continue even after its publication. Work on the standards committee in preparation of the second generation Eurocodes. As part of our Housing for All initiative, the increased use of timber is seen as a way to increase the rate of house construction, but also in relation to reducing the CO2 output and meeting Ireland's commitments in that. It is one of the few environmentally friendly building systems. Mass timber products such as timber frame, glulam, CLT and so on are seen as MMC. The term MMC has been around for probably 20, 30, 40 years even. Timber frame is covered by 440, and there's a draft PREN 14732 part 1. And that's been around for a very long time. It keeps getting held up for various reasons. But a timber frame manufacturer could CE mark their panels using this European assessment document. Okay. Now, this would not necessarily cover everything in IS 440, because obviously the site work and so on would not be included. But there are an awful lot of European assessment documents. And if a manufacturer goes to get an ETA, a European Technical Assessment, I think it is, or approval, then they have to CE mark the product And before the CE marker, they have to draw up a DOP. So, having a product with being CE marked and having a DOP can raise difficulties how that should be dealt with. Glulam has a harmonized specification, but it's a product, okay? It's a product like a timber beam. It's a product like a timber stud. So it would probably be inappropriate for it to be required to have additional certification. There might be a problem with Europe in that. Glulam design construction details would not therefore be the responsibility of a manufacturer. Yeah. The CLT standard was harmonized, but it was dealing from the CPR, and I think that was a mistake. But again, it could be CE marked through an EAD. One of the reasons why EADs are produced is that the name as a manufacturer CE market project where maybe their product doesn't have a harmonized standard, or maybe it's not fully represented by a harmonized standard. So this is a CLT standard, so it gives requirements for the manufacture and design. So while CLT has no equivalent to the national standard of IS 440, IS 440 at the moment doesn't have a European equivalent. So it's a bit of a strange thing there. The second generation Eurocodes covers CLT design for normal temperature and fire, and they do the same for I-joists. Any national technical specification for CLT would probably be similar to 440, except manufacturer would be covered by the EN. It would take a while to produce any national specification for CLT, but there is work going on in that within the timber and construction working group. So I've already mentioned this. Roof trusses, which include punch metal plates or engineered joists, and engineered joists, all have ETAs and no longer have argument certs. The system owners, the people responsible for producing the metal plates and the steel web joists, and the design backup, the engineering backup, and the various information showing compliance with the building regulations, they do that, rather than having to rely on the argument board to do that. So, they provide information relevant to the building regulations. I mean, steel web joists and some of these didn't cover fire resistance, for example. They refer to fire tests and so on, but there's no details in this. You can get the details in the documentation provided by the ETA owners. Technical guidance on beam refers as applying to complex, non-complex buildings, while Irish argument certification refers to new and innovative building products and processes. Okay. But the technical guidance documents also are more than guidance. They actually contain national requirements. They can be ensigned in terms of the sound performance. They can be on fire resistance and things like that there. So they are a bit more than technical guidance document. I would have preferred to have seen them as regulations, if you like, and then you could have guidance in terms of how those regulations can be met. So again, I've referred to that ETAs don't cover all aspects of the building regulations, related to timber, but this applies to other certificates and products. This question about when should you go and have an argument cert is quite a difficult one, I think. There are some that obviously should have an argument cert, and I think possibly this one is one that where the ITW trust frame, which is really, they would claim this to be a form of timber frame, but it's where essentially you have, you have a framed, it's like a flat roof truss, but vertically, okay? So there's no OSB or any other board for racking, but this is one where even though it has an ETA, it's probably an example where it definitely needs an argument cert, I think. Smaller local authorities need support, I think, in this area about, do you need to go and get a fire test, or do you need to go and get an argument cert? Quite often you get builders being told to go and get a fire test, even where, it's obvious to anybody that they don't need to. An example where there's a one-off house in the middle of a field. The relevant boundary was miles away, well, a long distance away, but they had used timber cladding on the outside. But the local building control officer wanted to get that builder to go and get a fire test. Didn't make any sense. Building regulations are national regulations, and the technical guidance documents are national guidance, but they're not being interpreted the same across the country, even within the same LA, local authority. I've come across within local authorities where one building control officer was supportive of timber frame, and another one was totally against it. So I think that this is quite important. And if somebody's trying to build here using CLT or timber frame, and they're coming from the outside the state, these are difficult. These are the problems that they face. I think this is probably one of the things about 440. I think there's an underlying assumption that the timber frame will be built and designed and manufactured in Ireland, and that's not the case. Plasterboards coming in from all over Europe, probably it'll be coming in from China soon, or God knows where else, So there are aspects of this that need to be sort of thought a bit more. So So I want to bring your attention to alternative solutions, okay? And this is taken just from here, okay? Volume 2, Volume 1, when it comes out, will have, well, the current technical guidance document will be 2006. Has something similar, but there's no obligation to adopt any particular solution contained therein, okay? The use of alternative design solution standards, et cetera, provided the level of fire safety achieved is adequate to satisfy the requirements of the building regulations. It's quite easy. A lot of people forget that the technical guidance documents are not the building regulations, but alternative solutions is important for new building systems, okay? So, if you're going to go strictly in with some of the requirements in the technical guidance documents, combustibility, limited combustibility, and so on, then you're not going to have new building systems. The supplementary guidance, the supplementary guidance document to Volume 2 doesn't mention alternative solutions. No, alternative solutions are in the building regulations. They're in the Volume 2. They're in technical guidance document. It's very important that alternative solutions are kept. So they should have that in with the same prominence in the technical guidance document in Volume 1 when it's produced, because the current draft that came out last year, virtually, the amount of reference to the alternative solutions was tiny. I mean, you could quite easily miss it when you're reading things. The supplementary guidance document requires fire testings, and it appears to overrule Volume 2. I think that's how it would be interpreted, that you can't design by calculation, you're going to go and get fire testing. And when I talk about fire testing as well, this comes to the situation when you look at 440, for example, the scope refers to studs of 600 centres. So if somebody puts the studs in at 900 centres, do you have to go and get fire testing? You can't design by calculation. Yeah, well, maybe that's a bad example, but really what I'm trying to point out is that there's a question of divergence from a standard or whatever, and at what stage do you sort of say, well, there should be a fire test carried out, there should be an argument cert, but who makes that decision as well is important. This is a concern in terms of that calculations for fire resistance might not be acceptable. And this is what also Volume 2 says, and the current technical guidance document B 2006 says something similar. Information on tested elements is frequently given in the literature available from manufacturers and trade associations. Any reference used to substantiate the fire-resistant rating of construction should be carefully checked to ensure that it's suitable, adequate, applicable to the construction being used, a bit like a DOP. Small differences in details, such as fixing methods, etc., may significantly affect the rating. So this is the problem. I think that's eminently sensible, by the way. But if you're going to go by the supplementary guidance documents, well, the certifier and designers cannot check the fire test reports. They're not in the public domain. But here's another thing: the department has approved constructions and materials, and are they now responsible for the use of these constructions? Probably. And I can remember going back in IIRs and so on, the department was trying to get out of approving constructions and materials. That's one of the reasons why the Irish Agriculture Board was set up. The plasterboard manufacturer would appear to be absolved of any responsibility as well, provided they comply with EN 520, which has got nothing to do with fire resistance. It has, the only fire performance it's got to do with reaction to fire. So because they're not going to affect of the supplementary guidance document was, well, we didn't have access to the fire tests. So we had to have typical details in 440, which is not ideal. But 440 also does allow fire resistance to be demonstrated by calculation, as the Eurocode does. So 440 reflects the Eurocode. Fire resistant calculations have been accepted since the 1980s, but it would appear that they might not now be acceptable to building control. How building control deals with calculations, whereas for normal design or fire design, it needs to be looked at to farm them out to consultants to check. That actually can be difficult, more so for, it's probably easier for them to check for fire design rather than for normal design, normal temperature design. So here's an interesting one. A plasterboard manufacturer could test their fire test their product to this standard, and that would give a more accurate design by calculation, because this gives you if you tested this, I think you have to carry out 5 tests that you can then determine the failure time of the board. So they could declare that, and they're taking responsibility then for the performance of their board. Plasterboard manufacturers change their mixture of gypsum in their product and so on all the time. This is not a standard, which is very, very useful. I haven't fully read it, but it's durability of reaction to fire performance, classes of fire retardant treatment, and so on, okay? And that could have an important influence on the use of CLT and other mass timber products, because the durability is an important word here. There was a concern within the department that fire retardant treatments might leach out, okay? And then, well, what's their lifespan and things like that there? Well, this standard covers this, and it should be mentioned in the when volume technical guidance document B volume 1 is produced. It should be included in it. It should be included actually in volume 2. The timber Eurocodes are due to be signed off in about a year, okay? So the NSAI has a number of mirror committees, and what that means is they have the European committee is there, and then the NSAI has an equivalent mirror committee to that. So we commented on certain parts of part 1 and part 2 of the Eurocode 5, and they reflect the state of the art. The second generation of the Eurocodes should be published in 2027, with the current standards being withdrawn in 2028. Work on national annexes for the new Eurocodes should progress during 2024, but ultimately we probably have until this date to prepare the national annexes. The Eurocodes, as they do now, and therefore fire testing, will have to comply with EN 1990, which is the basis of design. It's probably conservative fire design by calculation, okay? And it's probably safer compared to fire testing. Sorry, yeah, okay, that's basically it. Just to just mention a few things. NSAI has a scheme for timber frame. Now, it's a timber frame manufacturer's approval scheme. It deals with factory production control. It checks that the designer is used and the designer has PI insurance, and it checks on materials and so on, because a lot of manufacturers, certainly in the past, somebody walking in through the front door and they, I've got this wonderful product, and they say, oh yeah, great, I'll use it. Now they have to look at the materials they're using and have appropriate certification or technical information on it. So NSAI hasn't produced any European technical assessments, and I think they should start doing that. I think it's a gap. I mean, I think it's actually personally quite extraordinary they haven't produced any European technical assessments, because a European technical assessment covers Europe. Okay, it mightn't deal with individual building regulations, but it does, give information relevant to the product all over Europe, including it can or could give information on fire resistance and so on. So one of the things, just by the way, to finalize, is that within the new Eurocode, it has information on plasterboard. There's a very conservative way of design by calculation, and that gives information on failure times of the board and the start of charring rates behind the board, and it's based on fire tests from all over Europe. So you can see that would be safer, rather than saying, okay, making assumptions that it's going to be Irish gypsum is going to be used or something like that. Anyway, that's it. Okay, so I'll finish that. Okay.